My name's Ian Wilson of Benthic Solutions. I'll briefly introduce myself. I've been a marine scientist, particularly environmental marine scientist, for over 35 years. I was the founder of Guideline Environmental and subsequently Benthic Solutions. I've been involved with a large amount of development in the offshore survey industry. I have worked with habitat mapping, developed the first techniques for habitat mapping, particularly in herring spawning ground surveys and baseline and habitat mapping using camera systems. I've also developed a number of pieces of equipment which are now currently in use universally throughout the industry, examples being the Autosiva. Also, I designed the first freshwater lens system for working in poor visibility. As I mentioned, I'm going to talk about Seabed and Seashore. Okay, so first of all, I need to thank all the contributors to this within the community of practice. We did a COP discussion, and we had a number of contributors that helped pull this together, not least Bob Earl, who's actually pulled the whole thing together, but also Anna Cowie of Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, Jen Love, Natural England, MMO, and Rob Spray and Dawn Watson of Sea Search, along with Keith Clarkson. I think we'll start off with the overriding point that no major seabed incidents were recorded for 2023, and we did canvass the community for practice. There were no reports of any major seabed incidents, no storm washouts or T-like events as we saw in previous years. So that's a good start. Operations ongoing. Seashore surveys in 2023 by the Wildlife Trusts. There's been a number of involvements, a number of surveys both in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire Wildlife Trusts. Data was put together by Anna Cowie. This information can be found under this website, under the Get Involved website on the Shore Search site. Chalk reefs, data was pulled together with Sea Search, Natural England and the Eastern IFCA. Chalk reefs are off of the Norfolk and Suffolk coasts, are now certified as marine conservation zone. Sea Search are doing surveys on an ongoing basis. Also in 2023, there was a condition assessment completed for the Cromer Shoals chalk bed, MCZ, and the chalk reef feature was classified as no change. Source for that was Jen Love and Natural England on that website. Also for the chalk reefs, Eastern IFCA are currently supporting a 3-year study on the effects of potting on the Cromer chalk reefs to see if there is any adverse impacts that might require bylaws. Source for that is Ron Jessup. Also an update of conservation advice packages for the MCZ and SACs. This was pulled together by Jen Love again and Natural England. All this information is publicly accessible online. And the key sites that these have been looking at are Inner Racebank, Northridge SACs, Haysborough, Hammond and Winter SAC, Cromer Shoal, Chalkbed, Marine Conservation Zone, and the Wash and North Norfolk Coast SAC. Non-native species, this will come up a few times in this. There's apparently been a slowdown or levelling off of new non-native species around the UK, as reported in the recent Porcupine Conference for 2024. However, Pacific oysters are spreading both south and west, and we believe DEFRA are regulating with no new introductions into the eastern region. It's a good point to raise at this time, talking about the introduction of eDNA, particularly when it comes to non-native species. There are regular eDNA long period monitoring surveys that have been undertaken in the East Coast ports, particularly for non-native species. as well as a number of ad hoc North Sea assessments where eDNA is also occurring. Source for that is Applied Genomics Limited. I'll talk a little bit more about eDNA later. If I go through industry by industry, offshore wind, there are multiple operator surveys that were undertaken in the North Sea, Southern North Sea, during 2023. These are particularly for describing the seabed communities around either the licence area or the main route, although these are areas that are very similar or have partially been covered by the one Benthic Poseidon data sets. So the landfalls for these are typically in North Norfolk and Lincolnshire, but they provide very comprehensive data sets. The key problem with these is there's always a time lag in the release, because as they're privately acquired data sets, there is commercial confidence there, and it takes a little while for that material to make it through to the public sector. So on the offshore wind, we'll talk about the data types. These are very multidisciplinary, both baseline and habitat mapping surveys. They typically start with geophysical survey program, and then that is ground truth with environmental sampling. Now, the Southern North Sea is quite different from the Northern North Sea. It's very mixed sediment, a lot of diamicton, mobile granular sediments. So it requires a number of sampling options because of that environment. Most surveys are typically ground truth using both grab sampling and seabed camera. And because the Southern North Sea, particularly out of summer period, is high turbidity, it does often require additional equipment, in this case the freshwater lens I mentioned earlier, a modification to your cameras to be able to see seabed clearly, particularly in the wash area. Again, these, as mentioned before, the data is often in a time lag and not usually available immediately after it's been taken. So even though there are a number of surveys were done in 2023, that data isn't publicly available at this time. So the impacts from offshore wind. Yes, there is an impact from wind farms, particularly around the change of the sediment, loss of soft sediment at the monopile sites, and obviously a replacement with a hard substrate. The construction element of it also has an impact, disturbance during the construction, and also that in certain areas, particularly on certain banks, there may be ongoing possible scour effects. Unlike other industries, particularly the oil and gas industry, there's no chemical deposition typically in the construction of an offshore wind farm. So we don't see the chemical impacts or effects of organic enrichment with bed tire mats, for example, that we would expect to see if there was discharges. But there's a number of surveys ongoing actually this year, which are looking at restorative techniques around wind farms. I don't expect they'll be published until late 2024, or maybe even 2025. But they are looking at nature-inclusive designs for seabed armouring and additional structures around the base of monopiles and potentially floating offshore wind anchor sites. There's also a number of other areas where things like oyster bed seeding and actually the use of seaweed farms in multiple use licenses are also underway in the Southern North Sea at the moment. The other thing about offshore wind farms is there are physical restrictions to trawling, and these are expected to enhance the biodiversity net gain around those license areas. This diagram shows quite a good representation of those impact changes around, particularly in this case, a monopile, where you've got this change from soft sediments to a hard complex habitat. There's also significant species diversity, as effectively it creates an artificial reef. So you've got biofouling organisms actually on the hard structures themselves, and also it attracts fish around the structure as they feel protection from it. So offshore winds, there's often, after the wind farm has been put in, there's ongoing post-installation reporting. This monitoring is done, but this is not done on an annual basis. And as with the other surveys, there is also a time lag for the reporting on these. It's helpful to assess the seabed recovery post-construction, but currently there's no real evidence published that helps us on this. A number of projects underway, as I mentioned previously, as to assess the potential for biodiversity net gain within a licence area and next to a monopile structure. The greatest limitation really with these surveys is how disparate they are, both the nature of where the survey works are and how they're reported. Because they're not done that routinely and they're quite widely spaced, the data is difficult to integrate in something like this, which would be an annual assessment. And really, there is very poor wider communication of reporting results. And again, that's another theme we will have going through this presentation. Other industries we won't forget, decommissioning. There were several decommissioning projects undertaken in the southern North Sea in 2023. Unlike the northern North Sea, the southern North Sea has very strong currents and quite mobile sediments. So historical cuttings piles are generally very small, if at all, present. Where they're often the organic enrichment is buried. The chemical profiles show only very limited enhanced organic impacts, if at all. And many indicate little or no residues at all because the surface material is so mobile. So problems with seabed and seashore reporting. Well, this is the first year of the ESME reporting. That means it's particularly difficult because we don't really have a point of reference. And as previously mentioned, most of the survey works carried out in the on Benthos is usually undertaken on a very ad hoc and quite disparate basis. Most data sets are very spatially spread out as well as temporally spread out as well. As previously mentioned, the data reporting has a large time lag. This accounts for both the regulatory monitoring that's carried out by CFAS, Environmental Agency, etc., but also with the individual reports and submissions from private operators. Repeat surveys are generally pretty limited and generally also widely spaced, typically 3 to 5 years, unless there is an ongoing development. Ultimately, it makes it very difficult then to have a year-on-year comparison of those sites. And when those reports are produced, they don't really give out key observations. They don't isolate them, and then these are not communicated. So the key items we would want to see is things like new discoveries that you might find in a survey, any changes from previous years, but as I previously mentioned, it won't be from the previous year, it will be from maybe 3 or 5 years previous. And do we see any long-term patterns? So I think it's worth mentioning at this stage that there are innovations in the industry, particularly around eDNA, that may well help us to provide routine observations. The advantage with eDNA is it provides quicker and simpler access to information. The key advantage is it really can be acquired by non-specialists in its acquisition. It covers very broad biological groups. It's very accurate, molecular accuracy, by the way, and it's very easy for data access in the future. Disadvantages is that it must be transparent for their standard operating procedures. Not all operators are actually meeting those requirements at the moment. It's not 100% effective on some of the biological groups, although it's pretty effective on most of them. And there are some limitations over quantification, although there are some tricks within the analysis that allow us to do semi-quantification. It can be carried out in benthos and waters, and where that's been used, it's providing exceptional biodiversity profiles over many biological species groups. And innovations recently, or relatively recent, is as pictured to the right, is the in-depth water sampler that was applied genomics has designed, which creates increased efficiency, particularly in tidal waters. It can be used by anybody, but the data has multiple uses and can be analysed for multiple biological groups, and that's a huge benefit. So for future use with eDNA monitoring, as previously mentioned, there's already ongoing routine monitoring within ports for non-native species, but there are ad hoc offshore programs. To work effectively in tidal areas, you need to require large and prolonged sampling, as acquired by the in-depth sampler. This removes the bias that you get with spot sampling, because it's 20 times more efficient, and it covers a full tidal cycle. With the analysis, it's important to consider multiple gene analysis, because then you can provide multiple uses of those data sets. And a number of ongoing programs, particularly with applied genomics, but with Natural England, Plymouth Marine Laboratory, SEPA, have had very, very successful studies on benthos and fish, invasive species, marine mammals, and the advantage is all of those tests can be done. All those tests can be done on the same samples, so it's very efficient in that way. The advantage is, because it's so cheap and relatively simple to acquire, it won't be difficult to create rolling time series. Now, once you have that, it means that comparisons on monthly, seasonal, and annual basis will be very, very quick and easy to do. There has been a regional and national monitoring program has already been proposed to DEFRA, and the advantage of a national monitoring program framework would mean it would create a seeding for the integration of private operators. So basically, anybody that wants to add additional data to the framework can do so, because there is a framework. So the way forward for Seabed and Seashore really is quicker turnaround on regulatory work. We won't see those year on year, and it would be good to have that information available, even if it's only like headline results from the reports. Headline reporting from the private sector also. Again, the main reports will not be available straight away, but I think if the regulators could request that private surveys that where they are acquired are reported for headline interpretation, that would also help in monitoring within this program. I think we should definitely be embracing new technology, as I say, particularly eDNA, because it's very quick and effective, and it does provide a data set that then allows for ongoing monitoring in a relatively simple way. But I think the key one is much better communication between the agencies and industry, because essentially it's the acquisition and availability of data sets into these programs that will allow us to do these sort of overviews when we're looking at monitoring. Thank you very much.